The fragility of peace, a whispered memory in the cacophony of war, often reveals itself not in grand pronouncements, but in the silent, insidious erosion of the familiar. Before the great cannons roared, Ypres had been a tapestry of ancient stone and vibrant commerce, its canals mirroring a sky unblemished by smoke. Now, the city stood as a skeletal silhouette against a perpetually bruised horizon, a monument to destruction where every brick whispered of a life extinguished. It was into this crucible, in the waning months of 1916, that Arthur Davies descended. The Ypres Salient, a name murmured with a mixture of dread and grim reverence among the troops, greeted him with an assault on the senses. The air, thick and suffocating, carried the oppressive, clinging scent of mold and decay mingled with gunpowder smoke, a combination that caught in the throat and permeated every fiber of his uniform. Beneath it, a faint, acrid tang of burnt powder lingered, a ghost of battles past and a promise of those to come. A low, guttural hum vibrated through the very ground, a sound not merely heard, but felt in the chest. It was the distant, ceaseless thrum of artillery, a deep, rhythmic pulse that had replaced the Earth's natural heartbeat, becoming Ypres' new, terrifying throb. Arthur, despite his usually keen eyesight, saw the landscape as a blur of dull grays and browns. Skeletal, twisted trees clawed at the sky, their branches stripped bare, while the ruins of buildings stood like hollowed-out eyes, their stone bones picked clean by the relentless shelling. Everywhere, the mud, a thick, omnipresent mud that seemed to breathe, sucking at his heavy, waterlogged boots with a greedy, insistent pull, threatening to swallow him whole. The biting cold, a damp, penetrating chill, seeped through his greatcoat, reaching the marrow of his bones, a constant companion in this desolate landscape. He was assigned to a sapper unit, men who lived and breathed the earth, digging tunnels and fortifications. His new sergeant, a man named MacTavish, greeted him with a grim nod and a sarcastic remark about the futility of trying to stay clean in Flanders. Mac, a man whose shoulders seemed permanently hunched from years of subterranean labor, had a face etched with deep lines of exhaustion, his small, piercing eyes having witnessed more horrors than Arthur could fathom. Mac's voice, rough and raspy, carried the weight of a cynicism forged in the fires of countless battles. He spoke of the mud as a living entity, a relentless adversary that claimed men as surely as any bullet. Among the faces in the dugout, one stood out: Thomas Miller, a young recruit whose wide blue eyes still held the innocence and terror of war. Tommy, barely 18, was a stark contrast to Mac's hardened demeanor, his innocence not yet fully crushed, though an incipient fear constantly flickered in his gaze. Arthur felt an immediate protective instinct towards the boy, seeing in him a reflection of a youth that the war had already begun to devour. The trench routine was a monotonous cycle of waiting, punctuated by moments of sheer terror. Days bled into nights, marked only by the shifting patterns of distant artillery fire and the intermittent crack of sniper rifles. Men spent hours, sometimes waist-deep in the cold, muddy water that filled the makeshift dugouts, their bodies aching from the constant damp and lack of proper rest. Mac occasionally offered a dark joke, gallows humor that served as a fragile shield against the creeping despair, a way to cope with the absurdity of their existence. Arthur, ever the engineer, found himself meticulously inspecting tunnel supports, his mind seeking order in the chaos, a desperate attempt to control the uncontrollable. A tense calm, however, had settled over their sector in the last few hours, a silence more unsettling than the usual din. It was the kind of quiet that preceded a storm, a held breath before the plunge. Then, a subtle shift in the air, a faint, acrid smell that was not gunpowder, but something sharper, more chemical, began to prick Arthur's nostrils. It was a scent that spoke of an invisible enemy, a new dimension of horror that had been unleashed upon these fields. Simultaneously, a low, rhythmic thud, almost imperceptible beneath the earth, suggested methodical, persistent digging from the enemy lines. The sound of a distant, solitary aircraft, a French Voisin 3 bomber, droned overhead, its engine a faint hum against the heavy silence, a reminder of the eyes constantly watching from above. Then, the first distant heavy thud, followed by another and another, steadily growing in volume, signaling a sudden, terrifying increase in artillery fire. The ground beneath them began to tremble, a deep, resonant vibration that promised chaos. Arthur's gaze met Mac's, a silent understanding passing between them. The calm was broken. The storm was coming. The days that followed Arthur's arrival blurred into a monotonous rhythm of survival, each moment a testament to the grim endurance demanded by the salient. He found himself drawn deeper into the camaraderie of his sapper unit, a bond forged not in shared laughter, but in the silent understanding of mutual peril. Sergeant MacTavish, with his gruff exterior and a surprising tenderness beneath, became a mentor of sorts, his weathered hands demonstrating the precise art of shoring up a collapsing tunnel or setting a charge. Mac often spoke of his life before the war, his voice a low rumble as he described the suffocating darkness of the coal mines in Scotland, a world not so different, he mused, from the tunnels beneath Ypres. He would recount the constant damp, the ever-present threat of collapse, and the camaraderie of men who trusted their lives to each other in the deep earth. He had seen the first gas attack in 1915, a yellow-green horror that had swept over the French lines, leaving behind a trail of choking men and a new, insidious fear that had never truly left him. Young Tommy Miller, on the other hand, was a raw nerve, his youthful bravado slowly eroding under the relentless pressure. Arthur often caught the boy staring into the middle distance, his blue eyes wide with a terror that seemed to grow with each distant thud of artillery. Arthur remembered a time, not so long ago, when his own world had crumbled. A bridge, a grand design of steel and concrete, had buckled and collapsed during its final inspection, a structural flaw he had somehow missed. The screams of the injured, the metallic taste of failure in his mouth, the cold sweat that had slicked his palms, these sensations still haunted his nights. He had sought the war in part as a penance, a desperate attempt to rebuild something, anything, even if it was just a trench wall, to atone for the lives lost under his watch. The memory of the bridge's twisted metal, a grotesque parody of his ambition, often superimposed itself over the mangled landscape of Ypres. The tension in the air thickened with each passing hour. The artillery bombardment, which had been a distant rumble, now grew into a sustained, deafening roar, shaking the very foundations of their dugout.
The earth shuddered, sending tremors through their boots, and fine dust rained down from the ceiling, coating everything in a gritty film. Then a new smell began to permeate the air, distinct from the usual stench of mud and decay. It was a sharp, acrid odor, like bleach mixed with something sickly sweet, clinging to the back of Arthur's throat. He knew it. Chlorine, the invisible enemy. He squinted through the haze of smoke and dust, his keen vision struggling to pierce the gloom, searching for the telltale yellow-green cloud that signaled its approach. Miles behind the front lines, in a field hospital hastily erected in a shelled-out barn, Nurse Elise Dubois moved with a practiced, weary grace. Her hands, firm and agile, worked tirelessly, bandaging a shrapnel wound here, administering a painkiller there. The air in the makeshift ward was thick with the metallic tang of blood, the cloying sweetness of ether, and the faint, sickly sweet smell of gangrene that no amount of disinfectant could entirely mask. Elisa's deep green eyes, though perpetually tired, held a fierce determination as she witnessed the endless procession of broken bodies, the human cost of the war, laid bare before her. She had seen the first victims of the gas, their faces contorted in agony, their lungs burning, and the memory fueled her relentless drive to save every life she could.
Meanwhile, in the shattered remnants of Ypres itself, Jean-Pierre Moreau moved like a ghost through the rubble-strewn streets. His sharp, almond-shaped eyes constantly scanned the horizon, his keen hearing picking up the subtle shifts in the wind, the distant rumble of transport, the specific cadence of German patrols. He was searching for scraps, for anything that could sustain the few remaining civilians who, like him, clung to the ruins of their lives. He had seen his printing press, once the heart of his livelihood, reduced to twisted metal and scattered paper by German artillery. He distrusted all armies, seeing them as invaders, but he was a pragmatist. Survival demanded a certain flexibility. He felt the ground vibrate beneath his worn boots, a deep, resonant hum that spoke of the escalating bombardment, and a faint, unfamiliar scent, sharp and chemical, pricked his nostrils. Back in the trenches, the misery was a constant companion. The mud, a thick, viscous entity, clung to their boots, sucking at their every step, making movement an exhausting, soul-draining effort. The biting cold seeped into their bones, a constant ache that no amount of layering could truly alleviate. Rations were bland, tasteless biscuits and tinned meat, chewed without pleasure merely to sustain the body. Yet, even in this hell, moments of fragile humanity flickered. Mac, with a wry grin, offered Arthur a half-smoked cigarette, the acrid smoke a momentary comfort against the damp chill. He spoke of the Ypres Times, a trench newspaper filled with dark humor and satirical jabs at their impossible situation, a testament to the enduring spirit of the men. But the brief respite was shattered. A low, hissing sound, distinct from the artillery, began to grow louder, a chilling whisper carried on the wind. It was the unmistakable sound of gas cylinders being opened, a collective, terrifying exhalation from the enemy lines. Then, through the smoke and the dust, a sickly yellow-green cloud, thick and unnatural, began to roll across the desolate no-man's land, a silent, suffocating tide. It moved with an eerie slowness, yet inexorably towards their position, a monstrous, formless entity, intent on devouring everything in its path. Arthur felt a cold dread grip his stomach, the acrid smell now burning his nostrils, a taste of metallic fear in his mouth. The invisible enemy had arrived. The world dissolved into a maelstrom of sound and sensation. The artillery barrage, which had been a distant threat, now descended with a visceral fury, each shell a thunderclap that tore at the very fabric of the earth.
The ground beneath Arthur's feet bucked and trembled, a living beast in its death throes, sending tremors up his legs and through his spine. The air, already thick with the acrid scent of chlorine, now burned his nostrils, a searing pain that promised worse to come. He could hear the whistling descent of incoming shells, a terrifying prelude to the concussive blasts that followed, each explosion ripping through the air with a deafening roar, punctuated by the screams of men caught in the open. The yellow-green cloud, a monstrous, unnatural entity, rolled inexorably towards them, its tendrils reaching, grasping, suffocating. Arthur, despite the ringing in his ears from the incessant bombardment and the rising panic in his chest, fought to maintain a semblance of order. His mind, usually so precise, felt fractured by the chaos, yet a primal instinct to protect his men surged through him. He shouted orders, his voice hoarse against the din, urging them to don their gas masks, to find cover, to move. His old failure, the collapsing bridge, flashed before his eyes, a phantom weight on his shoulders, intensifying his desperate need to succeed now, to save these lives. He saw Tommy Miller, his young face contorted in terror, fumbling with his mask, his eyes wide and unseeing. MacTavish, ever the rock, moved with a grim efficiency, pulling Tommy's mask into place, his rough hands surprisingly gentle as he guided the boy towards a deeper part of the dugout. Mac's voice, though muffled by his own mask, conveyed a steely resolve, telling Tommy to breathe shallowly, to trust the filter. In the makeshift field hospital, Elise Dubois moved through a nightmare made real. The influx of gas victims was overwhelming, a tide of suffering that threatened to drown her. The air in the ward was thick with the metallic tang of blood, the sweet, cloying scent of ether, and the horrifying, burning smell of chlorine that clung to the men's clothes and skin. She saw faces contorted in agony, their lungs burning, their eyes streaming, some coughing up frothy pink fluid. Her deep green eyes, though weary, held a fierce, unwavering compassion as she worked, her agile hands moving with practiced speed, administering morphine, clearing airways, offering what little comfort she could. She heard the rasping, desperate breaths of men fighting for air, the low moans of pain, and the occasional chilling silence of a life extinguished. In the shattered heart of Ypres, Jean-Pierre Moreau felt the ground tremble violently beneath his feet, the vibrations of the distant, relentless shelling echoing through the very stones of the ruined city. He smelled the acrid, chemical tang of the gas carried on the wind, a faint but unmistakable promise of death. His keen hearing, honed by years of survival in the war-torn city, picked up the faint, desperate cries carried on the wind, the distant, muffled sounds of carnage that painted a grim picture of the front lines. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that the storm had broken. Back in the dugout, the situation grew dire. A direct hit shook their section of the trench, sending a shower of earth and splintered wood raining down. A section of the tunnel, one Arthur had meticulously shored up, groaned ominously, then collapsed with a sickening crunch, trapping a portion of their team. Communication lines went dead, the silence on the field telephone more terrifying than any scream. They were isolated, cut off, the suffocating gas cloud now swirling just outside their makeshift shelter. Arthur's mind raced, calculating angles, assessing structural integrity, his engineering instincts kicking in despite the terror. He saw a narrow, unstable passage, barely wide enough for a man, leading deeper into the earth, a forgotten drainage tunnel that might offer a desperate escape. It was a gamble, a risk that could lead to further collapse, but it was their only chance. He made the decision, his voice firm. telling Mac they would try to clear the passage, to find another way out. Mac nodded, his eyes visible above his mask, conveying a silent trust. The air in the dugout grew heavy, the silence punctuated only by their ragged breaths and the distant, muffled thud of artillery. The storm had passed, but its echoes and the new claustrophobic reality of their entrapment had just begun.
Dawn, when it finally arrived, did not bring solace, but merely illuminated the full extent of the night's savagery. Ypres lay exposed, a lunar landscape of churned earth and shattered dreams. Craters, gaping wounds in the ground, grimmed with murky, stagnant water, reflecting a sky the color of bruised plums. Scattered across the desolate expanse were the grotesque forms of bodies, some half submerged in the viscous mud, others twisted into unnatural poses, silent testaments to the indiscriminate fury of the bombardment. An oppressive silence, heavy and suffocating, had settled over the battlefield, a silence far more terrifying than the cacophony that had preceded it. A ringing absence of sound that seemed to absorb all hope. The air, though no longer thick with chlorine, carried the cloying, metallic scent of death and the acrid tang of burnt earth, a smell that clung to the inside of Arthur's nostrils and refused to dissipate. Arthur emerged from the precarious safety of the dugout, his body stiff with cold and exhaustion, his mind a jumble of calculations and grim assessments. He surveyed the damage to their section of the trench, the collapsed tunnel entrance, and the faces of his surviving men. A silent guilt gnawed at him, the heavy weight of decisions made under duress, of lives lost despite his best efforts. He felt the cold sweat prickling his skin, a familiar sensation that spoke of his past failures, now amplified by the scale of this new devastation. Sergeant MacTavish, though visibly more haggard, moved with a grim, practiced efficiency, his movements stiff but resolute. He began organizing the rescue efforts, his voice, though raspy, cutting through the stunned silence. His usual dark humor was absent, replaced by a weary pragmatism that spoke volumes of the toll the night had taken. He simply stated that they had to dig out the trapped men, that there was no other choice, his eyes scanning the debris with a practiced eye for structural weakness. Young Tommy Miller was in a state of profound shock. His blue eyes, once wide with a mixture of innocence and fear, were now vacant, staring blankly at the mud-caked ground. He moved slowly, his limbs heavy, his face pale and streaked with dirt and tears. He did not speak, merely followed Mac's quiet instructions, his youthful spirit seemingly crushed by the horrors he had witnessed. Arthur watched him, a pang of sorrow in his chest, recognizing the irreversible loss of innocence in the boy's vacant gaze.
Miles away, in the field hospital, Elise Dubois worked without pause, her compassion tested to its absolute limit. The ward was a tableau of suffering, a constant stream of gas victims arriving, their labored breaths filling the air with a horrifying symphony of pain. The smell of antiseptic mixed with the raw metallic scent of fresh blood and the sweet, putrid odor of gangrene, a constant assault on her senses. Her agile hands moved tirelessly, her movements precise and swift as she cleaned wounds, administered aid, and offered quiet words of comfort. She saw the unspeakable, the faces of men suffocating, their skin blistering, their eyes swollen shut, yet her determination remained unyielding, a beacon of resilience in the face of overwhelming carnage. Meanwhile, in a stark, temporary command post behind the German lines, Captain Klaus Richter reviewed the reports of the night's offensive. His angular face, usually impassive, held a flicker of something akin to melancholy as he read the casualty figures, both Allied and German. He acknowledged the tactical success of the gas attack, noting the breach in the enemy lines, but a deep weariness settled in his ice-blue eyes. He considered the cost, the sheer brutal waste of life, and a silent contempt for the use of such a dishonorable weapon, the gas, flickered across his thoughts. He simply stated that the objective had been achieved, his voice devoid of triumph, before turning to the next set of orders. Back in the salient, new obstacles emerged from the rubble. The tunnel infrastructure, vital for movement and supply, was severely compromised, requiring urgent repairs that would demand Arthur's full engineering expertise. Morale among the men was dangerously low, a palpable despair hanging in the air. Supplies were critically scarce, the meager rations seemed to shrink with each passing hour, and the need for fresh water and medical provisions was dire. Then new orders arrived, delivered by a mud-splattered runner whose eyes held the same haunted look as Tommy's. The message was terse, indicating another potential offensive, or perhaps a high-risk reconnaissance mission into the newly devastated no-man's land. Amidst the desolation, a small act of humanity flickered. Mac, finding a battered copy of the Ypres Times in the mud, its pages stained but its satirical cartoons still visible, offered it to Arthur. Arthur took it, a faint, weary smile touching his lips, as he read a darkly humorous poem about the mud, a shared moment of grim levity in the face of overwhelming despair. The silence that followed the bombardment was not peace, but a fragile temporary lull, a moment for the living to breathe, to mourn, and to prepare for the inevitable return of the storm. The devastation was complete, yet in the shared glances, the quiet acts of solidarity, and the enduring, if grim humor, a flicker of humanity persisted. A testament to the indomitable spirit that refused to be extinguished by the mud and the madness of Ypres. The days that followed the great bombardment settled into a new, unsettling rhythm. The air, though still heavy with the scent of damp earth and distant decay, no longer carried the acrid tang of chlorine. A profound silence had descended upon the salient, a silence so vast and encompassing that it seemed to absorb all other sounds, leaving only the ringing in Arthur's ears and the frantic beat of his own heart. The landscape remained a testament to destruction, a vast, open wound of mud-filled craters and splintered timber, yet in the absence of the constant shelling, a fragile, almost imperceptible sense of stillness began to emerge. Arthur, his body aching with a weariness that seeped into his very bones, found himself moving with a new, somber purpose. The collapse of the tunnel, the gas attack, the faces of the lost, these events had carved new lines into his soul, deeper than any trench. The ghost of the collapsed bridge, which had haunted him for so long, now seemed to merge with the devastation of Ypres, a shared landscape of failure and loss. Yet, amidst this profound desolation, a subtle shift occurred within him. He understood now that perfection was an illusion, especially in war. His purpose was not to prevent all harm, but to mitigate it, to protect those under his command with every fiber of his being, to build and secure what little safety could be found in this brutal world. It was a melancholic acceptance, a grim resilience that allowed him to breathe, to move, to lead. Sergeant MacTavish, though his face was etched with deeper lines of exhaustion, continued his work with an unwavering resolve. He spoke less, his usual dark jokes replaced by terse, efficient commands, but his eyes, when they met Arthur's, conveyed a silent understanding, a shared burden of command and survival. He was the bedrock of our unit, a testament to the enduring, stubborn will to simply carry on. Tommy Miller, though still haunted by the terror in his eyes, no longer moved with the same vacant shock. He was quieter, his movements more deliberate,
and Arthur noticed a new, hardened glint in his gaze, a nascent strength forged in the crucible of fear. He had lost his innocence, but in its place, a grim determination had begun to take root. Miles away, in the field hospital, Elise Dubois continued her tireless mission of healing. Her hands, though calloused and often stained, moved with the same unwavering precision, a quiet defiance against the tide of suffering. The scent of antiseptic and the low moans of the wounded were her constant companions, yet her spirit remained unbroken. She was a living testament to compassion, a beacon of hope in a world consumed by destruction, her dedication a quiet, powerful force. In the shattered heart of Ypres, Jean-Pierre Moreau, the civilian who had clung to the ruins of his life, began the slow, arduous process of rebuilding. I saw him one afternoon, a solitary figure amidst the rubble, meticulously stacking salvaged bricks, a small, defiant act of reclaiming what had been lost. His movements were slow, but imbued with a quiet dignity, a testament to the enduring human need to create, even in the face of utter devastation. One evening, as the last sliver of sun bled across the horizon, painting the scarred landscape in hues of bruised purple and fiery orange, Arthur found a discarded, mud-stained copy of the Ypres Times in a collapsed dugout. Its pages were brittle, but a satirical cartoon depicting a soldier up to his neck in mud, a wry smile on his face, resonated deeply. He read a short, darkly humorous poem about the futility of war, its words a stark, yet oddly comforting reflection of their shared reality. It was a small, fragile connection to the world beyond the immediate horror, a reminder that even here, humanity found ways to laugh, to reflect, to endure. Later that week, during a grim, unofficial truce to retrieve bodies from no man's land, Arthur found himself standing across from a German officer. It was Captain Klaus Richter. Their eyes met across the desolate expanse, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. There were no words, no gestures of animosity, only a shared weariness, a profound exhaustion that transcended the lines of battle. Richter's ice-blue eyes, usually so sharp and calculating, held a flicker of the same melancholic resignation that Arthur felt. In that brief, wordless moment, the vast, impersonal machinery of war seemed to shrink, revealing the shared humanity beneath the uniforms, the common burden of command and the futility of their endless conflict. The story of Ypres, Arthur realized, was not merely one of death and destruction, but of the enduring, stubborn resilience of the human spirit. It was about the lives that persisted, the small acts of kindness, the grim humor, and the quiet determination that flourished amidst the desolation. The landscape remained scarred, a permanent testament to the madness that had unfolded, but life, in its myriad forms, persisted. The distant echoes of artillery, though fading, would forever resonate in the memory, a haunting reminder of the past. Yet, in the quiet resolve of the survivors, in the slow, arduous process of rebuilding, and in the enduring, if melancholic connection between those who had faced the abyss, there was a profound truth, that even in the deepest mud, a glimmer of humanity could always be found, a testament to the indomitable will to endure, to remember, and to hope.